This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there. Welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. The course of the hour will run through all the business news stories you need to know about from right across the continent. First, though, a run through the markets here for you. Quite a bit of red ink flooding across the board today. MTN Nigeria, perhaps providing a bit of a bright spark. They should be joining the NSE somewhere between April and May. That's the NSE in Nigeria, if all goes according to plan. The parent company had a relatively positive start to 2019, a gain of about 7.5% so far this year. Thing is, though, this Nigerian listing can only happen after a $2 billion tax claim is settled, and it isn't clear if that can happen within the next 3 months. We'll certainly keep a very close eye on that story. Here's what's coming up tonight. The French president is in Kenya as part of a tour of East Africa. Now that MPs have voted down Theresa May's Brexit deal, what happens next? And we'll introduce you to this chocolatier who's burning some calories while creating organic chocolates in Côte d'Ivoire. All that and more is in the pipeline for you tonight. But let's start in the world of diplomacy and international business, where the French President Emmanuel Macron is in Kenya. It's the latest stop on his East African tour. He'll be focusing on investment and security in the increasingly strategic region. The French leader will also be attending the UN Environment Assembly in the Kenyan capital in Nairobi later on. He'll co-chair the One Planet Summit with Kenya's President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. Now, Mr. Macron's office says Kenya is the only African nation to reach the goal of making renewable energy 75% of its energy mix. The French president and his Kenyan counterparts are also expected to discuss the ongoing extremist threat in the region, as well as a range of transport and economic projects.
Mr. President, your visit signals our shared commitment to foster our bilateral relations and engagements within the region in various ways which will deepen, expand, and strengthen our bonds of friendship and cooperation for the mutual benefit of our peoples.
We are deeply committed in working together with Kenya on different topics. First, security, counterterrorism, and obviously the regional agenda. We discussed at length about the situation in the region. We work very well together on the situation, but we want to improve the cooperation.
All right, then, so let's dig deep into the details of what exactly this visit portends. Ali Kansatu, CEO of Rich Management, is with me in studio tonight. Thank you.
Evening.
All right, so this is the first visit by a sitting French head of state to Kenya ever. Why now? What's happening?
It's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I mean, two Anglophone countries, Ethiopia and ourselves, as it were. First-time visit. I think President Macron is speaking to a number of different things here. Firstly, don't want to be boxed into Francophone Africa. They're prepared to look outside that. If you look at the numbers, they're probably the 6th biggest investor in the Kenyan economy. Lots of investments which people might not think about. When you consolidate them, they're pretty serious. Peugeot, as we saw earlier today, Danone invested in the president's milk company. You've got a ton of that happening, a lot of financing of renewable energy for KenGen via AFD. So they've got a presence. It's not as if they're coming out of left field entirely. And I think more than that, there's a greater interest geopolitically speaking and geoeconomically around the Indian Ocean. And I think Macron is making a play and trying to position France to play a part on this western part of the Indian Ocean.
They do have access to the sea, though, through Djibouti.
Through Djibouti.
So this would be a sort of hedge, a secondary hedge, if you will.
And then obviously they've got the presence in some of these Indian Ocean islands,
Yeah.
which are very attractive to people because of the enormous economic exclusion zone. So they've got presences, but I think they're trying to build up on that.
Right, but if you step back and look at the trade and the investment players, as you pointed out, yes, they've been here, but not necessarily in a steady, growing, incremental fashion. Peugeot, for example, when I was a kid,
yes,
was
my
huge.
dad, a 504 Ramah.
Exactly.
That's an
My parents
icon.
owned a Peugeot forever.
That's the car I remember.
Exactly, but Peugeot was huge, and then Toyota came in.
They're back, don't knock them.
But that's the thing. With
yes.
Peugeot particularly, they're coming in, they're setting up an assembly plant, not a production plant, an assembly plant here in the country. But looking at our tax setup at the moment, buying a car is incredibly expensive.
No, there's a quid pro quo. There's no way these boys would be making these kinds of investments had they not been told that there's going to be some kind of more penal tax on second-hand cars, probably a banning of, a tightening up of the age limit on cars.
Which we're seeing coming in July.
Which is going to make these cars simply a no-brainer.
Right, but at the end of the day, how's that going to play out politically? Because essentially the government is saying, I'm going to give you access to assembled cars, but I'm going to limit your freedom of choice. If you want to go and get something from outside, you're going to have to stamp up a lot more for it.
Yes, I think, the government wants to encourage industrialization. This is an easy win. You're seeing a lot of these car makers spread out across sub-Saharan Africa. So I think for them, for the government, President Kenyatta, I saw in a tweet, was calling it a Kenyan vehicle. So you can see what's going on here. But I think essentially that thing was a done deal a couple of years ago. Just took a bit of time to go through the system. But I think it's trade is not an exciting number. France-Kenya. What's interesting to me
is about $230 million.
But what is interesting is these very big companies which have been here for years and years. Cement sector is Lafarge, for example. Total, upstream and downstream, and now big play in oil and gas in East Africa. So I wouldn't underestimate them. And they're a very sharp operator politically, geopolitically, and at an international level.
I'm glad you brought up Total, because 2016 was a nasty year for them in Kenya, because initially the idea was we're going to build a pipeline to take oil from Uganda into the Mombasa port, and then that plan got dropped off entirely. And now they're like, okay, well, we're actually going to come back. We're going to build one from Lokicha down to the port of Lamu, not even Mombasa, down to Lamu. Is this essentially part of that broader rapprochement?
I think it is part of it. I think, we lost out on that pipeline and the pipeline war with Magufuli, and if we're going to give credit to Magufuli about anything, we're going to give it to him for his success at winning these big infrastructure projects, which should have been our bread and butter. But yes, I think, there's a lot of quid pro quo with the French, right? You come and invest and we'll give you this, we'll give you that. That's how they tend to work. And I think, probably the importance of that pipeline is so important to Kenya and President Kenyatta. It would be a big win for him. I don't think it's a given, though. I think, the economics not stacking up for me. The oil up north isn't of the magnitude which would justify, I think.
Yeah, it's about 750 odd million barrels that we do have.
Yeah.
Right, one last question for you, because it does seem there's an infrastructure play, there's a defense play as well.
Correct.
Especially with Ethiopia, there was a loan of about $96 million.
Navy mind.
Correct.
That's why I'm talking about the ocean.
To a navy. And Ethiopia at this point it's a landlocked country.
No, but he's
so
made friends with everybody. He can park his navy wherever he wants.
But that's not land you control.
No, but I think essentially because you're such a big and powerful country, it would be, you would be able to exert control over your navy. It's just not parked on your border. It's on somebody else's. And I think Ethiopia under Abiy is going to play a much bigger role in security, particularly around this part of Africa. And I think that's a win-win for both of them.
Right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Alikan Sachu, thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure to see you.
Appreciate it. Right then, so of course we'll certainly keep a very close eye on the developments as Monsieur Macron continues his visit here in Kenya for a while longer. Let's turn our attention though to the business of aviation. Canada did something interesting today. They've grounded the world's third largest fleet of Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft following the crash, of course, of Ethiopian Airlines flight ET302 on Sunday. Canada now joins a long list of other countries that have essentially said we're not using this plane anymore, even though the US regulator, the FAA, says that the plane, as far as they're concerned, is okay to fly. In the meantime, rescuers from a Chinese-based company in Ethiopia have been helping with recovery efforts at the site. Data and voice recorders have been recovered, but the operation at this point is still pretty complicated.
Over the next few days, the salvage team will finish clearing up debris from the Ethiopian Airlines crash. Assisted by a Chinese company, rescuers have unearthed the wreckage, which was destroyed beyond recognition. Plane parts are scattered over an area of 10,000 square meters.
The cockpit was buried deep in the ground. Due to the tremendous impact, all the parts of the plane were compacted together. After we dug everything out, what remained was this pit nearly 20 meters deep. We reached the deepest point. We were not able to retrieve any complete items, not even a complete seat. Everything was crushed together and smashed up. Not one item was in a state where we could identify it from its appearance.
Recovery of the bodies is underway, and the investigation into the incident is gathering momentum. Ethiopian Flight 302 lost contact minutes after takeoff, crashing near the town of Bishoftu. Once the site has been cleared, the crater left behind will be filled in.
Because all the debris from the plane was mixed together with dirt, it was very hard to excavate. So we discussed this with Ethiopian Airlines and decided to expand the debris field to an area much larger than where the debris was actually scattered. So once we cleared the surrounding earth, we discovered a relatively complete body of the plane in the middle. This way, it's easier for the recovery team to lift it out.
The future of Boeing's 737 MAX 8 remains in question. Several countries have banned the company's best-selling model. They include Singapore, the UK and Germany. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Let's turn our attention now to aviation in Kenya and revisit the events of the 6th of March. At that time, operations at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport were briefly paralyzed in the morning when members of the Aviation Workers Union went on strike. Now, to be clear, that strike was called off earlier this week on the 11th of March, but we've not yet really explored what led to that strike. You see, it started with a proposal from Kenya Airways to get a 30-year concession to run Kenya's biggest airports. Now, if approved, KQ, as it's commonly known around these parts, would effectively get an airport that handled over 7 million passengers in 2017, over 300,000 tons of cargo, and had over 111,000 takeoffs and landings on it. But for Kenya Airports Authority, that's the state entity that manages JKIA among other airports, this deal basically asks it to cede its biggest single revenue earner to an airline that has lost over $650 million between 2015 and 2017. But here's the thing, it also will not cure one of KQ's biggest problems, its cost structure. Compared to the continent's biggest airline, Ethiopian Airlines, Kenya Airways has about a third of the planes and employees, but its employee costs in 2017 were equivalent to about 72% of what Ethiopian Airlines was paying its people. So given all these facts, is there really a rational business case for this proposed 30-year concession? That's a question I put to Kwame Owino. He's the CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs.
I do not think that given the structural deficiencies that KQ has, and they're undeniable. Yeah. Simply asking it to run the airport would be the best. It's a confidence trick.
Wouldn't it be easier, though, at least from a government perspective, to simply say if this is really a cost issue for KQ's books, then why not just tackle it through taxes?
Precisely, and I think that's what they don't want to do. Partly because, but I think KQ, and let's remember at the same time that part of this push is by a consortium of corporations that KQ owes a lot of money. Right. It is clear, looking at KQ's bottom lines, that it will not be paid for very, very clearly. So one of the things that they wish to do is to ensure that KQ has a fresh infusion of cash. Then obviously their debts will be prioritized. So part of it is just basically to solve the question about the decision that was made in 2016. Government put in money it did not have because it was cash strapped. It got this consortium of banks to agree to lend KQ for the time being.
To essentially do a debt equity swap.
Precisely, a debt equity swap. And what it happened was this debt was accorded priority in terms of being paid fast. It's clear from the operations alone that's not going to be paid. But I think it's also dangerous from a conceptual part that KQ has structural problems that need to be solved. One of them is KQ's workers benchmarked against the globe and against the incomes of the company among the highest paid in Africa and the world. That's a fact. KQ pilots earn higher incomes than Ethiopian Airlines pilots, which is a profit-making question. So unless we are dealing with those, we cannot hide that by simply saying, look, let's go up there and actually talk about mimicking the operational model of Etihad.
How to deal with the unions problem? Because the cost base, in part, one of the reasons why the cost base at KQ is as high as it is in part because of the bargaining power that the unions do have. Now, the one argument could be made, look, you could negotiate with the unions and tell them, look, this is the reality that we're facing. These are the economics behind the decisions we have to make, and we have to drop our costs, which unfortunately means that we all have to take part of the pain in terms of pay cuts?
Well, I think the power of unions in Kenya is actually just rising. Many people blame the constitution for it. I do not. I think I blame the fact that you see unions, especially unions in the public sector. And as you understand, the airport authority is partly public sector because it's run as a state corporation. Yeah. So that's part of what it is. So in addition to just having the ability to negotiate and bring their employer to the table, they also understand the political dynamics, which is basically the electorate and the fact that politicians look at much, much more than just the bottom lines. So in many ways, you find the politicians also who today do not want the merger or that strategic partnership between KQ and the airport authority. When KQ makes a decision about cutting down numbers or trying to make sure that it rationalizes its staff, both in terms of costs and the numbers, they'll be opposed to it. So in a way, we sit eyeball to eyeball with contradiction, but the power of unions, I think, is one of the reasons why KQ is in trouble. And I think if that does not happen, even the Kenya Airports Authority would be in trouble in a while.
Given all the things that we're doing here, our politicians are not willing to make the hard decisions to actually streamline, to let KQ actually run as a proper business, to streamline its balance sheet, to drop its costs. But at the same time, we're seeing opposition to the idea of them saying, well, okay, let them have a concession on JKIA. Yes. Strictly speaking, why don't we just cash out of the business?
I mean, that's a sensible thing to do. But given the legacy costs that KQ has, nobody's going to buy them at this time. I don't think anybody would. Even KLM is reluctant to put in any more money because they understand that you'll put in money, but the political constraints that comes with this idea that KQ is for some reason a national asset and not necessarily a business means that if you put in your money, you'll be in trouble if you have to make adjustments. And the airlines business globally is very, very competitive. So at one point, you're going to have to make really, really difficult decisions. Now, for a business manager, they're difficult decisions, but you know what you need to do. But getting the political consensus to have it going is going to remain a problem.
Right then, company news wrap. Let's start with aviation, pretty much picking up from where we left off. Norwegian Air is seeking compensation for costs and lost revenue from the plane maker Boeing after the low-cost carrier grounded its fleet of 737 MAX 8 aircraft. The Oslo-based airline has 18 such jets, all of which have been grounded by European air regulators following Sunday's deadly Ethiopian Airlines crash in which 157 people died. The German automaker Volkswagen is planning to cut up to 7,000 administrative jobs by 2023 to lower its operating costs by $6.7 billion. Now, the job cuts are part of the automaker's drive to invest some $25 billion over the next 5 years in developing cleaner electric vehicles and electromobility tech as well. Kenya's largest network operator, Safaricom, has set up a partnership with the global e-commerce site AliExpress. It will allow Kenyan consumers to pay for their purchases using their M-Pesa accounts. It's just the latest in the string of partnerships that Safaricom is banking on to bolster M-Pesa's position in the country's mobile payment sector. You can watch details on that on our YouTube channel as well. And finally, the e-commerce firm Jumia has filed paperwork with the Securities and Exchange Commission for an IPO at the New York Stock Exchange. If approved, Jumia is set to become the first startup that mostly operates in Africa to be listed on the NYSE. That's a run through your headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be exploring if data costs really have fallen or not in South Africa. And Somalia is getting a $90 million boost to its economy. The details on that and lots more coming up next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, Who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Now, South Africa has one of the highest data costs on the continent, at least compared to the world's emerging markets as well. The country's Independent Communications Authority, ICASA, if you will, started an amendment bill earlier this month for new end-user and subscriber services. But some telecommunications groups are effectively breaking these new regulations by forcing users to buy yet another data package if they don't want their data bundles, the ones they've bought, to expire. Now, the Data Must Fall campaign has been raging on social media platforms, and it's adding weight to the growing calls for these operators to lower the cost of data in the country. All right, so let's dig deeper into this particular topic. Koketso Mweti is the founding executive director of the campaign group Amandla Movi. She's joining us live from Johannesburg tonight. Thank you very much for your time tonight, Koketso. So, for those of us not familiar with the Data Must Fall campaign, tell us how it started and what triggered it.
So I think as an organization, our primary concern is that we have 54% of the country that is living in poverty, right? And for this group lives in informality and are thus dependent on mobile network operators for data. And so what ends up happening is because of the cost, right, which is so high for low-income users in particular who buy smaller bundles, this is a very unfair poverty premium that's added on top of the cost of the data. But also because this group lives in informality, they do not have access to other forms of data like broadband and so on, and have thus been unable to enjoy like lowering prices and increasing competition. And so for us, this was a deep, deep concern, because what this leaves us with is an internet of two types of internet, right? One in which the wealthy and those who are more connected are able to enjoy the full range of what the internet has to offer, whereas low-income consumers are forced to use and limit their use of the internet. And this is happening in a country where, in Gauteng, to apply for schools, you have to do it online. Certain institutions only allow you to apply for jobs online, you know. You can only register a business online and so on. So you are basically excluding a significant portion of the population from enjoying the benefits of being connected.
Correct. So there's something else that I find curious, and it's not just in South Africa, it happens in Kenya as well. This treatment of data as a sort of perishable commodity. It's not a banana, it's not a vegetable, and so on and so forth. So what reasoning is this that MNOs use to say that you must use X amount of data that you paid for before it, quote unquote, expires?
Yeah. So the mobile network operators typically argue that, they buy at wholesale costs. And so by knowing how much people will be consuming, this allows them to know how much they should be investing, right? And we are saying that consumers should be getting the full value for money. If you have spent on X, which is not a perishable good, you should be able to enjoy that product at your own pace. And so we think the issue of like expiry is something that has to go, which has been a huge part of our agenda as well. And we also do think that it's an excuse that is just used, because we've also seen other examples of mobile network operators such as Rain, which is a new player in the South African market, where data does not expire, right? So it's also being upheld by this duopoly, the ability of the big players to close down the space and basically hold us ransom to their rules.
Yeah, it sounds like that's grounds for a market power investigation by the Competition Authority.
Indeed, indeed. So the whole data process, looking into the cost to communicate in South Africa, has been unfolding in various ways. As you are aware, we have currently the communications regulator in South Africa has put out a set of regulations, that in some ways are supposed to limit the ways that mobile network operators are pickpocketing, particularly low-income consumers. But then there's another aspect which we've also been working very hard on, which is an investigation by the Competition Commission. The results of the report are expected in the second quarter of this year. But yeah, completely, we are looking at market dominance and what it does, what it means for the rules and what it means for, the playing field, and also the impact on consumers of an unfair playing field.
Let me just dive into the weeds for the details here, because the regulator said that the regulations they put forward would compel, in their words, MNOs to roll over data bundles credited to consumers with every recharge. Now, is this sort of being used as a sort of narrow legal argument by the networks to not carry forward unused data unless you recharge?
Yeah, so I mean, over the course of the implementation of the regulations, we've seen big pushback, by the mobile network operators. Just last year, 24 hours, just over 24 hours before the regulations were meant to be implemented, we saw the mobile networks, approach the court and try to stall these regulations. And at the same time, shortly after they were implemented this year, we saw in the lead up to it, the big players, in particular Vodacom, got into a lot of trouble for wanting consumers to pay to have the data roll over. And we really had to push back on this, right? Because in essence, it undermines the intentions of the regulations, which is about ensuring consumers get their full value for money. And so what they were essentially trying to do is charge a levy for you to enjoy the benefits of the regulations. While Vodacom has backtracked on that, we do still have serious concerns about attempts to undermine these regulations. So number one, since backtracking, Vodacom has put in place a condition that to have your data roll over, you have to buy a data bundle of the same amount, right? And this is not practical. A low-income consumer may afford 1 gigabyte of data today, but might not afford it in the next 3 weeks. So what then? So we see it as still an attempt to undermine these regulations and extract, basically still charging a levy for consumers to enjoy the benefits.
Right, one last question for you. There was this fascinating study EcoBank did last year, comparing the cost of 1 gigabyte of data in dollar terms across a range of countries in Africa. 1 gigabyte of data costs $10.34 essentially in South Africa. But right next door in Mozambique, it's just $2. Why is data in South Africa so expensive?
So there is a number of factors, right, including the very real reality that market dominance of certain players has led to ruthless profit maximizing ways of operating. And this is something that has to be dealt with, you know, both in regulatory process and also in other means, like recognizing that communication is a fundamental right. And so, yeah, the cost to communicate cannot be left to serve the interests of the market. It is fundamentally about people, people's access to information, and people's ability to communicate with others and live lives they should be living.
Indeed. Kokatso Mwesi, thank you very much for your time this evening. I appreciate it. Looking forward to having you on the program yet again in the future. All right then, so we're still in South Africa. As you're probably aware, the French energy giant Total has found significant hydrocarbon deposits off the South African coast. An estimated potential of about 9 billion barrels of crude, another 60 trillion or so cubic feet of natural gas. With that sort of haul, many describe this as a potential game changer for the country's economy. Yes, CGTN's Angela Coppola now examining what the South African government needs to do to make this a fire starter.
The find was announced in February after Total had completed their test drill site in December. Now the work starts for the local industry.
We need to be ready and to have people understand how they can benefit and participate in this sector. We've got some strong signals now that things are starting to take off, and we need to be ready to participate fully as South Africans in that. So to develop the value chain, the company capacity and the skills profile in South Africa is our big focus.
The Department of Trade and Industry are waiting for the revised legislation to be tabled so they can begin their work.
I think the big issue for the DTI will be to understand what the legislation looks like in terms of local content and how we develop local content and supply development over time. I think that's going to be a key piece for us to sink our teeth into.
The sector regulator is upbeat about the gas find and the opportunity it presents.
I think the big opportunity from a regulator's point of view is to get it right. I think South Africa is in a position, because it has come along later than other African countries, where we've actually made a discovery that could be world-class and could be eventually monetized. We are in a good position where we have seen what has happened in other African countries, and to me, it is really what comes out of our new legislation that's separated from MPRDA.
The country has one opportunity to get the basics in place or risk the possibility of explorers losing interest.
We need to start moving fast on establishing regulations and really establishing a right kind of fiscal frameworks, our laws and everything. And the industry needs that. You cannot love jobs and hate those who create jobs. We need to incentivize this growth.
The oil and gas sector and the country's government have between 7 and 10 years to get their ducks in a row in order to take full advantage of the opportunities. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to the Horn of Africa, where Somalia has received millions of dollars from the EU. This latest funding round is worth over $90 million. And that cash will be spent on improving local governance quality as well as supporting victims of climate change. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo reports from the port city of Kismayo.
The signing ceremony took place in the port city of Kismayo in an event that was attended by international partners as well as Somali officials from both the central government and regional administrations. The $90 million project is expected to boost stability efforts in the country and promote local governance, inclusive economic opportunities and protecting the most vulnerable in the society.
It's about delivering economic peace, governance dividends. This is what we want to do with this program. That service delivery becomes also a catalyst for greater governance and for greater security. And we want to see all the Somalis working together, not only in this program, but in every aspect of Somali life. This is our aspiration, and this is what we hope this program will contribute to.
The program will target projects in river areas, including regions near the capital, as well as road projects linking Galmudug and Puntland regions.
I think this program is critically important, but it has to be different from what it used to be. It doesn't have to be us spending money or donors supporting us. it must have an impact of the government's political agenda. It must support the security sector reform we're initiating. It must support the economic growth agenda that we're working on. It must support the social sector delivery that we have under our roadmaps. And it must support the leadership's vision in bringing the nation forward.
In recent months, the European Union has been providing direct funding to the Somali government. Last year, it channeled more than $116 million towards state building and provision of basic services. The funding is now expected to improve the lives of many in the country. Authorities have been urged to inject more funding into the country's fishing sector, a vital source of job creation for many young people in the country. And with one of the longest coastlines in mainland Africa, experts say that the fishing sector has the potential of playing an important role in the revival of Somalia's economy. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Kismayo, in southern Somalia.
On to North Africa. Tunisia is open to a lot more Chinese investment into the country. Its investment minister says the North African state is keen to host a research center set up by the Chinese telecoms maker Huawei. CGTN's Adin Chouachi filed this report.
Tunisian Investment and Development Minister says his recent visit to China was successful on all levels. Ziad Laderi met with the Chinese Minister of Transportation, the Vice Commerce Minister, and many Chinese officials and bankers.
I have discussed with our Chinese friends ways of boosting investments in Tunisia in many sectors like industry, railways, transportation, energy and banking. The Chinese way of doing business is very efficient. It is within the spirit of the Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese enterprises, banks and investment companies offer the best services at the best price and respect deadlines. China is a distinguished partner for Tunisia and Africa.
Laderi has proposed the establishment of a Huawei Research and Development Center in Tunisia while visiting the tech giant's R&D center in Beijing.
I have learned about Huawei's activity, its technological and research potential, and the programs it presents to develop the ICT sector, as well as its role in offering technological solutions in several countries, including Tunisia. Huawei is leading company in technology and development. Tunisia will increase cooperation with Huawei.
The Tunisian delegation, led by the Minister of Investment, met with the members of Tianjin City Chamber of Commerce, along with representatives of Chinese companies that are keen to invest in Tunisia in several fields, including textiles, food and energy industries. Tunisian professionals have welcomed the cooperation projects with China.
Tunisia aims to increase foreign investment and to boost export. It's a win-win partnership. Tunisia can become a platform for the export of Chinese products in several fields. We have the skills. We can develop the infrastructure with our partners.
Tunisian authorities have formally invited Vice President of Huawei to attend the Tunisia Investment Forum TIF 2019 to be organized by the Foreign Investment Promotion Agency, FIPA, in June 2019. Tunisia is encouraging Chinese companies to invest in the North African state. According to the Minister of Investment and Development, the government will offer support and privileges to Chinese enterprises to ensure the success of their investments. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a break. Here's what's coming up next. Now, the Theresa May's Brexit offer has been shot down. What happens next? And we'll also explore why more and more foreign students are going to China.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today?
What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Now, a quick update on the story that we're following. The 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, basically saying that the FAA will ground the 737 MAX and the MAX 8 and the MAX 9 versions of that particular plane. You'll recall, of course, in the last couple of hours, in the last 48 hours or so, the FAA has basically been standing firm and saying we're not going to be grounding these planes, even as the rest of the world has been doing pretty much that. The former Transport Secretary, Ray LaHood, actually said that the US should be grounding these planes as a matter of urgency, pretty much the same way that the FAA did with a Dreamliner when they're teething problems with that particular aircraft. We'll, of course, bring you up to speed with the latest developments on this as it develops. Now, let's focus on the House of Commons. It's due to vote relatively soon on whether or not to rule out a no-deal Brexit scenario, whether to take that off the table. Now, if they do that, that would see the UK crash out of the EU without a deal on the 29th of March. The second day of major Brexit votes comes a day after British lawmakers overwhelmingly voted to reject the withdrawal agreement brokered by the Prime Minister Theresa May with the EU. So then, let's get you the latest on what's happening over in London. Richard Bestick joins us now from that very city. So, Richard, today's vote lets MPs decide if they want the UK to crash out of the EU without a deal in hand. Where do the parties stand on this?
Well, as with everything Brexit, Ramah, it's not really a division of the parties, albeit the opposition Labour Party is going to be voting for taking Brexit, a no-deal Brexit, off the table. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, has also said that she wants to take the no-deal Brexit off the table, albeit she's also said in the House of Commons earlier that she stands by her deal, twice rejected now, resoundingly, as the best deal around, suggesting that once the no deal's off the table and they move forward, that actually she might come back and try tabling it for a third time. So we're, as you say, in the last few moments, counting down to this vote. I don't think there's any doubt that a no-deal Brexit will be removed from any discussion here. It's opposed by parliamentarians, by business and industry, because of the huge economic impact that it would have on the British economy. That was reiterated by Chancellor Philip Hammond in the Commons earlier. So we're waiting for it. It's the minutiae that we'll be watching carefully to see if it gives us any clues as to where the government plans to go in the future. Ramah.
Indeed, but let's look at the option list here. MPs, assuming they do vote against crashing out without the deal, and then they'll have to ask the EU for an extension of time. Why would the EU even agree to that? Because they've said they're not willing to extend this at any point in time. And in any case, even if they do agree to it, the House of Commons has shot down 2 deals. What can be done?
It's the very fact that the Commons keeps on shooting down these deals, which have been negotiated over a long period of time, over years with the British, and they've gone back here, and then the Brexit hardliners have said, well, no, we don't like it, and they have voted it down. Last night, the 4th biggest vote against a sitting British government in the history of Parliament, and you remember back in January, they had the biggest vote against it in the entire parliamentary history in Britain. In Nairobi this evening, the French President Emmanuel Macron said if the British want to extend the deadline, 16 days away now, for Brexit, the day when Britain finally leaves the European Union, they'll have to come up with some good reasons. If it's just for extending the road, finding a new can and kicking it down, then they probably won't say yes. So what Brussels will be wanting, Ramah, is good reasons why there should be any extension whatsoever.
Indeed. So at this point, the options then are limited to either reversing Article 50, holding a second referendum or another general election. But I'm presuming there isn't time for all 3 of those to happen before June, is there?
Well, the reality is, Ramah, we have no idea of where the government's going with all this. As I was saying to you, that the Prime Minister seems to be suggesting that she'll come back for a 3rd attempt at getting her deal through. Philip Hammond, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, appeared to be suggesting in the Commons earlier that he wants to get some kind of a cross-parliament consensus together before they proceed. The threat to the UK Prime Minister's premiership is such that she might not last. Her cabinet might move against her. There was a meeting of the 1922 Backbench Committee earlier. They were very unhappy with the way things have been going. And the CBI, Britain's biggest business lobbying group, says it's about time this circus ended. So although there may be plans afoot, the Prime Minister might not be able to reach them purely because events will overtake her.
Indeed. One last question for you, Richard. So many have argued that Theresa May has failed as a negotiator, as a Prime Minister, as party leader. But given the stack of cards she'd been dealt, could anyone have done any better than she did?
There are arguments for and against, Ramah, as you'd expect with Brexit. I mean, there is an argument, for example, that says that the reason the hardline Brexiteers hate her deal so much is that it's demonstrated to them that there is no such thing as a perfect Brexit. There's an argument that says she drew too many red lines. She ruled out, for example, the customs union with the European Union too early, so her movement was restricted. But then again, the divisions in this country, and you can hear the protesters here in London still late at night shouting out their corner, the divisions that has been created by Brexit are just so deep and so evenly divided that, yeah, really, there was probably no perfect deal that she could have come up with.
Indeed, quite the interesting times we live in. Richard Bestick there live in London. Certainly expect a lot more updates from his end of the world a little later on today. Now, going away to university can be exciting, surprising and scary as well. Going to university in a foreign country, however, tends to amplify pretty much all of those feelings. But China is becoming an even more attractive option for foreign students. The nation's global influence and competitiveness in education is expanding. In fact, many overseas students are now enrolling right in Chinese majors without studying the language first. CGTN's Uche Okoronko takes us to one of China's premier universities to find out what so many foreigners love about the place.
The sun sets on another busy day of classes at Beijing's University of International Business and Economics. Good friends, Felipe and Kevin, meet up to exchange tales of life as foreign students in China. It was an unlikely friendship. Felipe was born in Costa Rica, raised in the United States. Kevin is from Belgium. What the two young men do share is a keen interest in China.
I find it like one of the oldest civilizations, if not the oldest one in the world, which their foundations, the way they think, I'm very interested in learning more about that.
I had already an experiences in China before. So 4 years ago, I went to Chengdu, which is a city in the south of China, and so I went there to train Kung Fu.
The two are among almost 500,000 students from outside China now flocking to the nation's universities. They say they are settling in well, providing each other friendship as they both overcome the language barrier and vast cultural differences. Much like English and Spanish-speaking Felipe, who plans to take on a business major in Chinese, many students now choose to enroll in Chinese degree courses right out of high school, rather than just studying the language.
When I came here, I was in Hanyuke, which is Chinese classes. So I was in intensive Chinese, so every day I had classes from 8 to 5. This semester, I changed my class. I'm doing, which is called Yukeban. Yukeban. Yukeban is a preparation for your foundation course, your Benko. So I will start my university next semester in Chinese.
About 12% of China's foreign students are enrolled under some form of scholarship. Kevin is now on the tail end of an English language master's degree in logistics management, able to pay his fees after he was awarded one of the many scholarships that are now on offer.
At the end, I chose the Chinese government scholarship because it was a full scholarship. The idea is to see if I get like an interesting job here, or maybe what I really want to do is like to make a bridge between China and Europe, with Belgium.
As Felipe and Kevin head out to look for their evening meal, several fellow international students from different nationalities wave as they walk by. Many of them are from Belt and Road countries, encouraged by growing ties with China. They are also attracted by the improved performance of local institutions and significantly cheaper degrees, which range from around $1,300 to $6,500 per year.
I believe that if you really want to do something in life and you set your mind to go to that goal, you will do it. You will obtain what you want. So for me, I knew clearly I wanted to come to China. And then I would not say it's hard, but of course I'm not saying it's easy.
Felipe and Kevin choose to have dinner on this night at one of their favorite local restaurants called Nai Nai, where they exchange warm greetings in Mandarin with the Chinese owner, recognized as familiar faces. It is a reflection of the growing people-to-people exchange, as China's education sector opens up to the rest of the world. Uche Okoronko, CGTN, Beijing, China.
Right then, brief update on commodity prices. Gold does seem to be benefiting a bit from all the anxiety triggered by the Brexit vote, at least as far as March is concerned. Year-to-date gains there at about 2% or so. Gains from the start of March, just over 1%. But the platinum group metal palladium just seems to keep up with its winning streak from July last year. It's up over 55% in the last 12 months. It's with gains of 22% so far this year. Now then, let's move on along to a commodity of a different sort. An artisan chocolatier in Abidjan, the heart of Côte d'Ivoire, is producing raw organic chocolate using a stationary bicycle with a grinder attached to its wheels. Her company makes chocolates from organic cocoa beans grown and produced in the country. They're made in the purest form to preserve the taste and the natural nutritional content of the cocoa beans. CGTN's Michael Karanja reports.
In the middle of the floor of Denham Road's Mont Choco factory sits a grinding bike that is surrounded by large trays of carefully sorted cocoa beans. Dana and her team are not thinking about fitness as they pedal on their exercise bikes. The only thought is chocolate.
The bicycle grinder is an opportunity for us to practice our eco-friendly philosophy. We really want to have a minimal impact on the environment by using minimal electricity, by combining with a short workout, which also makes it a playful process.
Poured in a funnel, beans are transformed into a paste by a grinder activated through pedaling. According to Dana, Mont Choco's unique flavors lie within the fact that the beans are not roasted or have added additives, highlighting the authentic taste of the raw bean. The Ivorian of French-Lebanese descent is one of the latest entrepreneurs in Ivory Coast to become a chocolatier using the Ivorian cocoa beans. While the West African nation is the world's leading cocoa exporter, it is virtually impossible to find chocolate made in Ivory Coast from the Ivorian cocoa.
We are artisanal chocolatiers, so our process is manual from the cocoa pods to the final product of packaging the chocolate tablets. One of our trademark is that we do not roast the cocoa pods, we use raw chocolate. That enables the cocoa pods to retain its flavor and nutritional values. It's richer in protein, it's richer in antioxidants, and it tastes really different.
I've been eating Mont Choco for a while now. I have tried different flavors from Mont Choco, but the one I really like is nature. I like taking it with my coffee. I can tell that Mont Choco is different from other chocolates, and I prefer Mont Choco because I can taste the cocoa.
Environmental campaign groups say Ivory Coast is at risk of losing all its forest cover by 2034. As a result, organic chocolate is expensive to produce and caters primarily to European markets. A single Mont Choco chocolate bar sells for around $2, which is out of the reach for most local consumers. Mont Choco and other initiatives of the same kind are developed in Ivory Coast, but represent a niche market for only 5,000 tons of beans per year in a country that produces 2 million tons every year. Michael Karanja, CGTN.
Quick run through the currencies here for you. The Reserve Bank in South Africa is keeping a very close eye on inflation numbers coming out of the country. It expects a hike of about 0.75 percentage points due to the power price increases we saw from the energy regulator's approval. Now, those hikes do take effect from the 1st of April. And remember, the power price increase that the Reserve Bank expected was a lot lower, about 50% lower than what NESA actually did approve. These are your currencies, and that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. Thank you very much for your company on the program. We'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last 60 minutes. Several ways of getting your thoughts back to us. All of them, of course, are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.